This route I'm doing today of approximately 8 miles takes in 2 Norman churches and much more in a walk from Tockwith down to Tadcaster in an area of land known as the Ainsty in the Vale of York. So what is the Ainsty? The Ainsty was originally a medieval wapentake, first recorded in the 11th century as Ainsty in the West Riding of Yorkshire, meaning it was the name for an administrative division within a larger area.
Although for much of its existence it was an area annexed to the city of York. As there are no tangible boundary markers for the Ainsty, to help me picture in my mind where it actually is, I remember that it lies west of York, but not as east as Wetherby, and is bounded by 3 rivers: the Nid to the north, the Ouse to the east, and the Wharfe to the south. But we are also in the Vale of York, and later on in this video I'll talk more about the makeup of the Vale. But what of the old churches in this walk? Several Ainsty villages have very old churches with well-preserved 12th century Norman features. The character of several are that of a single cell building adapted later, with shared architectural features such as an oculus window and incredible south doorways. It has been suggested that a lack of alteration to some of these churches after the 12th century suggests that the Ainsty was something of an economic backwater during the later medieval period, although there are in fact several other churches in this area dating to the later Middle Ages. But first, let us begin at St Helen's Church in Bilton in Ainsty.
This is St Helen's Church at Bilton in Ainsty, one of my favourite medieval parish churches in the area. The Pevsner's Guide for this part of Yorkshire tells me that St Helen's Church is largely 12th century, with some 15th century work in the south chapel and a few perpendicular and 17th century windows making up an unusual fenestration. There's predominantly 12th century work in here, including the Norman tub font and various bits of architectural sculpture throughout, particularly on the nave arcades and some of the corbels. There's also fragments of Anglo-Saxon and slightly later stonework which appears to be dotted around the church. Looking around, not recorded in the Pevsner, but the church has been slightly reordered in more recent years. There's the addition of quite a modern pod for equal access toilet. Many of the pews are still here, but some at the west end have been removed, and I'm sat here on these movable tables and chairs, which allows for a better use of the community space in this building. So let's just have a little look around and see what else there is to find in this church. So as I leave Bilton in Ainsty by the public bridle way to the southeast, you can see my red location marker there on the OS Map app on my phone. I refer to Joseph Morris's 1911 book, West Riding of Yorkshire, for the entry just after Bilton Church, where it says, "A short mile and a half in a beeline to the southwest are the slight remains of Sinningthwaite Nunnery, now incorporated into a farmhouse." I'm heading southeast, I'm not heading southwest, which is over there somewhere. Now, I have not left the village by a mile and a half yet, but I'm not sure if we're going to pass any of these remains, but I do know that people have been there and walked past and seen it, or at least I've seen photos on the internet. I can link to some of those before we get to Healaugh. But it is interesting for its relation to the Hadget family, who we'll come into again when we get to the church at Healaugh. So a lot of 12th century history going on around here. Let's just get moving and get to Healaugh. This looks like a good walk. It's a perfect late December day for a walk.
Vale of York is a gently undulating primeval landscape bounded by the ridge of magnesium limestone that rises to the west, with the Hambleton district of North Yorkshire and the East Yorkshire wolds to the east. In this Ainsty area, immediately west of York, it is a landscape firstly of rock and ice. It's also a low-lying plain consisting of 5 rivers which rise in the Yorkshire Dales many miles away and feed into the Vale by valleys formed in the last ice age around 11,000 years ago. The soils, formed from glacial till, sand and gravel, have been extensively worked by agriculture to take advantage of the fertile conditions. As such, the character of the area west of York is a patchwork of open hedged fields around small rural villages and farmsteads. There is also a high concentration of deserted medieval settlements, marking the contraction from the peak of medieval settlement and arable cultivation in the early 14th century. These can be seen marked on modern OS maps, with certain isolated farms relating to former medieval grange farms of earlier monastic foundations in the area.
So, as suspected, Sinningthwaite Farm is over there, which, according to my map, is over that shallow hill somewhere. But we are heading this way to Healaugh. Healaugh is a village of fascinating vernacular architecture and North Yorkshire houses of all sorts. We're here at the church now. We're heading in up the long driveway. See what I mean? The church at Healaugh is incredible if you're into 12th century Norman, Romanesque architecture. The south doorway is certainly one of the most celebrated in North Yorkshire for its various iconography and medieval symbolism and carvings. And it survives remarkably well in detail. If you'd have come here at an earlier time in the year, there would have been a central metal support bar coming right up to support. Well, there was significant structural damage coming straight down here, and you can see there's probably, it's weighted down in the middle. You can see the cracks there, but it appears to have been resolved now. A chap whose videos I enjoy tremendously on YouTube, he goes by the username Church Searcher. He's done a whole deep dive into the history of this building and does a better job than I could ever hope to do, so I will share the link to that video if you want to know more about the Hadget family and the 12th century history of this building. I'm just here to show you my favourite bits and a walk through the Ainsty towards Tadcaster. And I can probably see the brewery towers of Tadcaster. They're probably, actually I can't because they're probably behind these trees or somewhere over there. But anyway, let's see if the church is open and go and see some more remarkable architecture inside the building. Just to say about the corbels, also these are well worth spotting whilst you're here if you do choose to come and visit. There are 47 of them, and they have these great beast heads with gaunt expressions and eyes and bearing teeth. They're quite something, so I do encourage you to come around and have a look at them, and also go around the north side of the building because there's some also special medieval sculpture around there which I'll show you now. What is certainly a highlight for me are two things. Firstly, the imposts on the chancel arch on either side. They're both fabulously decorated. So let's see what the entry in the Buildings of England series says for it. So it says, chancel arch with one order of colonnettes, and then thick semicircular responds which are truncated a little above the floor level, so a low stone screen must be assumed to account for this. It's interesting. Not encountered that before, but you can see clearly what is referred to by that description. You can see where that first respond column stops. And then it goes on to say,
Capitals similar to those of the south doorway, but with the foliage now orderly rather than tangled. Trellis and more trails, scrolls and small animals to the shafts and responds. And then it goes on to describe the north arcade of the nave, which is a little later. You can see there the waterleaf capitals, a sign of that. North Yorkshire is a particularly good place to see Norman transitional architecture, and I suppose Healaugh is one of them. If I keep calling it Healaugh, please forgive me, I'm trying to get out of that habit. Looking west, you can see where I assume the Royal Arms were once hung, and they are now on the north wall of the north nave aisle, although they seem to have had some other piece of decoration above them. They look to be roughly the same size. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting distracted. So let's take a closer look at some of this carving. It is really, really quite nice and really heavily decorated. It's very impressive, really deeply carved, quite masterfully done. Similar on this side, on the south side of the chancel arch. This design here is reminiscent of Durham Cathedral, don't you think? And also in the crypt at York Minster. Don't read too much into that, I'm making only a simple observation. That's nice there, a little green beastie with some foliage coming out of its mouth. It's all very impressive. Shame I've put this away because I wanted to also describe this wonderful alabaster effigy. 3 recumbent effigies, the light through these south windows of the setting December sun, really illuminating all of the carved details on this piece of sculpture. Obviously this is a lot later in date than the 12th century sculpture that I've been showing you. This is probably 17th century, if I was going to hazard a guess. But look at these figures here. Wonderful detail. I've looked it up now, and this is the tomb of Thomas Lord Wharton, who died in 1568, and these are his 2 wives. He is in full armour, and they appear to be in civilian dress, if that's the best way to describe it.
Sir Thomas Wharton lived at Healaugh Manor, the remains of which we see later in this video, and were formerly a 13th century Augustinian monastic house. Thomas was a nobleman, not of this parish by birth, who held various titles throughout his life, spending his later years in Healaugh, where he bought the house of the Augustinian estate after it closed in 1535. Thomas is also memorialised with a similar tomb, also including his 2 wives, at St Stephen's Church in Kirkby Stephen.
As we leave Healaugh Church, we just need to double back and go down Manor Lane here, which will take us to and take us through Healaugh Priory. I have a suspicion of what may be there. Whether we can see much, we can see and talk more at the time. Then it's back down into Tadcaster. Well, Healaugh Priory, what is today Healaugh Manor Farm, did not disappoint at all. I was actually greeted by 3 of the farmers who lived there, and they were moving some sheep across the public bridleway from one field to another. And they were very friendly. I didn't ask them any questions about their property and the history of it. Just let them do their job and get on. But was able to get a really good view of some of the buildings, and it all looks very smart. So, for an accurate description of the history of that priory, I would probably go to Pevsner, but I want a little bit more, just feeling a bit more like a lively description. So I've gone to Joseph Morris, who has this to say about the house. He says, 1.5 miles to the southwest of Healaugh,
at Healaugh Manor Farm are the very slight remains of Healaugh Priory. He goes on to say, consisting of only a few old perp windows, an early English capital, a now almost illegible coat of arms, 2 old corbelled chimneys, insignificant relics, seems a bit harsh, wrought into the fabric of 2 later houses. Yes, that's at the further end of the property from where I entered. All are picturesquely mixed up with farm buildings. Yes, that's true. And there is a strip of delightful flower garden. It probably still is something like that. Here was a house of Augustinian canons dedicated to St John. The history of its foundation is a little obscure. It's certain, however, that at some date prior to 1203, land was given here by Bertram Haget to a certain Gilbert, a monk of France, on which it would seem was afterwards dedicated a church of St John, and that at a later date, about 1218, William of Helmsley was installed here as first prior of the house of Healaugh Park. Well, I would say that the ruins were very impressive. They're not ruins, the remains, which have been made into a range of farm buildings. Really good stuff. So, I'm going to keep going on towards Tadcaster. And there we are, we're back on the straight path into Tadcaster. The end of another video. Last one of the year. Hopefully I'll be doing more in the new year. Well, I hope this video, this stroll through the Ainsty, was relatively informative. There are more informative videos about the history of those churches. I'm aware of that, and I've shared links to those videos by those experts. But a nice day, and I didn't want to waste it, and I wanted to bring you along with me. So, see you soon.